Here's a question. Why do we strive for validation, more certainty of virtues, when you would think virtues, good traits, are obvious? Perhaps virtues can be in short supply at certain times and in certain countries. And so those who are virtuous find themselves in the minority, and almost nobody then speaking up about virtues, lest they suffer blowback, shall we say. So the virtuous person may find oneself in a real corner, and most people not speaking up about the value of virtues, but rather having their head under the covers, so to speak, either by hiding somewhere, physically speaking, even in one's home, or going to the hills, so to speak, or leaving the country, emigrating, sometimes even claiming for tax reasons, or for better health, like better weather as per one's health. And then it's very easy for those who wish to speak up a little more, or a lot more, about virtues, and their importance not just now, but the future of all mankind, to believe they're the only person alive who feels the same way as they do, who has the same ideas. There are videos about this, in fact, this misconception that just because one's speaking up about some topic, some virtue, that if no one else is, that there's no one else who thinks the same way at all, when in fact that simply isn't true. They just are not in a position to speak up, perhaps. Maybe they don't have as good a vocabulary set. It's more blameful. Or maybe they don't have the same level of clarity. Or maybe they're not just as insulated from blowback as per where they live, maybe in a foreign country or a certain neck of the woods like Maine or Alaska or Vermont. Or maybe they don't have a strong power base like a lot of allies, or even bodyguards, or a mansion with large walls, or living in the desert. So then the virtuous person who wishes to speak up about a certain virtue may find themselves thinking, how can I be the only person in my country or even neck of the woods or planet who sees this when no one else does? I must either be a super genius or I must be totally crazy. And then goes the struggle, as per even the movie A Fortunate Man. I believe it's from the Netherlands, Denmark. The man trying to get validation that his massive strengths in terms of certain virtues, but certain brilliance of mind intellectually for engineering projects is not off the wall. But he makes then many enemies in how he goes about doing so, getting this validation. And again, in my opinion, validation being a desire to get more certainty as to one's perceptions, one's thinking being rather accurate or more accurate than average. And that one's virtues are actually there and are beneficial in the long run, not just to that person, but to all of humanity. So to recap then, maybe one feels one's all alone with one's thinking about virtues, that is, because one is in a position to have more clarity. Maybe one had a far better education mathematically, say, and as per linguistics, vocabulary, Both of these, by the way, pointed out as very important by Schopenhauer, the philosopher. Or maybe they somehow grew up more isolated in childhood. Maybe they were, quote, ugly. Or maybe they were a foreigner born into this country. Or second generation. Or maybe their religious views were different. Or they were brought up somewhat differently as per their sexual views and expressions. But at any rate, maybe they were somehow forced into more periods of isolation and learned how to tolerate this far better than average, and thus didn't feel the need so much to conform. And later in life can speak up much more easily because they can tolerate fewer friendships or no friendships far better than average. There's a video, by the way, somebody put out. The Spiritual Man Walks Alone. It was talking perhaps of Noah or Esau in the Bible. Perhaps Joseph or Solomon. I'm not quite sure. Now, Nada, N-A-D-A, from Awaken Insight Channel, has also spoke of this phenomenon in his growth and in thus relationships, and his wondering if he'll ever have another relationship. So there are some, like Schopenhauer, who urge you to basically hide your viewpoints. Well, in this place, I guess he may be talking even your virtues. But I'm not so sure that's a great idea. If you look at Schopenhauer and many other philosophers, perhaps Nietzsche, what have you, it seems to me a striking flaw often is a lack of respect for others. And thus shown in the vocabulary used, which is condemning of how someone got to be the way they are, including not just their intellect compared to some, but their virtuous status also. This understanding talked of by Dr. Gottlieb as the most crucial thing in relationships. And a few others have brought this up too, the key import of understanding. Even Erich Fromm said in The Art of Loving that almost no one has ever met someone capable of loving them. Well, I would say if we're talking about love in the sense of understanding, not doing things for people, it's very easy to give things for charity, for instance, or be what they call a good Samaritan, but to understand someone you're giving something to, I think could be a completely different thing. There are, in fact, motives for giving that have nothing to do with understanding someone. And understanding someone may involve giving nothing. So how can one especially be confused? Perhaps by the sheer numbers of people who are lacking somewhat in virtues, or their certainty level as to claims that they are either quite bright or quite virtuous. In fact, some have said, I'm not going to mention perhaps right this second, a prominent figure from back 40, 50 years ago, very common on the circles for advice, that almost all people are kind, loving, law-abiding persons. But whether we're going to believe that's true or not can vary quite a bit from person to person, and especially then where they group, where they live. Urban versus country, or what country in general, even the times involved. You might even consider scriptures from the Christian viewpoint, saying that we are all sinners, all flawed. But to what degree? It usually isn't stated that some are big, big sinners, maybe Hitler, and some are smaller sinners, like the Bible talked of very occasionally, like Esau or Noah. Still sinners. And If someone claims something with great certainty, isn't that telling us perhaps that they seem to have so few doubts? So they must have their act together and know what they're talking about. They have so few doubts compared to us. Hence, Tony Robbins once saying in a video that the secret to his getting from janitor to millionaire in 18 months was being of a person who out-certaintied the Microsoft executives when he offered coaching packages to them. And a man who wrote Get to the Point, saying, you must be certain as to when you convey things. And yet another person in a video or book saying that if you express flaws, vulnerabilities thus, about yourself when you're offering a product, people will think that you don't have your act together, you don't know what you're talking about, and they won't buy the product. It never being hinted at by a number of people that simply being too certain, i.e. 100% certain, ought to be a red flag to people. And it is to some, but not to those apparently who want to follow a guru, somebody they can download a complete package to fix things in 24 hours or less, or maybe the time it takes to read the average self-help book. Or maybe we get confused too by the words coming out of people who have a PhD or MD degree, i.e. a terminal degree from a brick-and-mortar approved college that is deemed scientific, up-to-date, having taken a look at all the panoply of what has come out beforehand, and that it is not hocus-pocus religious ideas from sages who are spouting off only intuitional things, but again, scientific and fact-based. Always the term's fact-based. But if you look in a variety of videos, you would see that some people say there is no such thing as facts, in fact. Only degrees of certainty, hence people like Einstein or Darwin having said that their ideas were merely theories. And even in the series Star Trek, or rather one of the movies, Spock once on the planet of Vulcan, having been told by his mother words to the effect that his guesses are better than most people's certainties or facts. I.e., what is a fact then? Some lawyers would say, in a court of law, in fact, I was looking this up a year ago, that libel and slander is saying something that's not factual. But then, how can we even claim that that's a truthful statement, that there's such a thing as a fact, when there's no such thing as ultimate certainty? This is even being worked on by cognitive behavioral scientists in California, for instance, amongst others. Not that it has to come from a brick-and-mortar approach, by the way. In fact, I was even thinking the other day that some came up with the term autodidact as per someone who has come up with genius or great ideas outside of the brick-and-mortar college approach. But why call them autodidacts? Why not just simply say there are those who have ideas from going to college, say to the terminal degree level, PhD or MD, versus those who have ideas from other sources other than college, especially to that degree. You might say the School of Hard Knocks plus keen analysis of it with proper motives, i.e. good values, and proper administration of reviewing things, too. So to doubly recap then, if we deem our values, our virtues, to be in the minority, when in fact they're not in the minority, only many people aren't in a position to state them with respectful words, i.e. respect, not insults, or to state them in a matter of, did I say great clarity, mathematically speaking, complexity-wise. Or if they're not in a position because they don't have strong allies, or they're simply afraid of death, or pain before death, as per some form of blowback. Or maybe they're even afraid of leaving a bad legacy, to some it's called. Then this will be a set of impediments, I believe. Not meaning, though, that no one has any craving or aptitude inside of them for virtue. It's just not expressed very often, perhaps, in certain countries especially, and in certain times. There's a man, he may be a Dr. Trivers, for instance, who has a book out, amongst others, The Folly of Fools, and he talks a great deal about the concept of convincing others through being certain. There's even the term, of course, from psychiatry, perhaps especially American psychiatry, of delusions, and even a book out on mass delusions. But others simply say, like Chris Doe from the YouTube channel The Future, F-U-T-U-R, that delusions are simply lies we tell ourselves. Or some might say thus wishful thinking, perhaps encouraged by marketing. So there's the matter of numbers. How can so many people be wrong is the question. Especially with so many people more going to college these days, it's said. Although there is a book out, rather derogatory perhaps in the title, The Dumbest Generation Ever. And another man had written a book, Snobbery. He also wrote a book on envy. But again, terminology can take your message and send it down the rabbit hole because it can be disrespectful. And once again, there being the question of how difficult it is to challenge someone with a PhD or MD degree, a terminal degree from a brick-and-mortar institution, as to their being trained professionals, as if they had gotten an inoculation for something like smallpox, and that it was going to last a long time and be as effective. These are the reasons then why I believe sometimes people who have a certain viewpoint as to virtuousness being good, and those not applying it having addictions, basically, ways of wanting short-term expediency. Why it is sometimes something they fight, but improperly so, to get clarity on, i.e. more certainty, call it validation, if you will. Instead of trying to get validation on what I call denials or other defense mechanisms of smaller nature.